I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, spirits, the supernatural, it all seemed like nonsense to me. That is, until I moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave the chaos of the city behind. But what I found in that house changed me forever. It's taken me years to gather the courage to tell this story, but I can't keep it to myself any longer. This is what happened. The house was a dream come true. 3 stories of faded grandeur, with a wraparound porch, stained glass windows, and a sprawling backyard. It was far more space than I needed, but the price was too good to pass up. The real estate agent mentioned that the house had been vacant for years, but she didn't say why. I didn't ask. I was too excited. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, painting, and exploring the nooks and crannies of my new home. But there was one place I avoided, the attic. It wasn't that I was scared, I just didn't have a reason to go up there. The door at the end of the hallway on the 3rd floor remained closed, a silent sentinel guarding whatever secrets lay beyond. It started with the noises. On my 3rd night in the house, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. At first, I thought it was a tree branch tapping against the window. But as I listened, I realized it was coming from above me. The attic. I told myself it was just an animal, a raccoon or a squirrel that had found its way inside. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It didn't stop. Eventually, I buried my head under the pillow and forced myself to sleep. The scratching continued every night, growing louder and more insistent. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. My curiosity, or maybe my frustration, got the better of me. One afternoon, I decided to investigate. The attic door was heavier than I expected, and it creaked loudly as I pushed it open. A set of narrow stairs led up into the darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed, my heart pounding with every step. The attic was exactly what you'd expect, dusty, cluttered, and filled with the remnants of past lives. Old furniture, boxes of yellowed books, and a child's rocking horse that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But it wasn't the clutter that caught my attention. It was the shadow. In the far corner of the attic, where the light from the single window didn't reach, there was a patch of darkness that seemed wrong. It was too deep, too solid, as if it were absorbing the light around it. I shone my flashlight on it, but the beam didn't penetrate. It just stopped, as if hitting a wall. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by some unseen object. But as I watched, the shadow moved. It shifted, just slightly, like a person turning their head. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over an old trunk. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, but the shadow seemed to grow taller, stretching toward the ceiling. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. I spent the next few days trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was my imagination, fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the attic. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or a draft causing the shadows to shift. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. The shadow had been real. I decided to do some research. I visited the local library and dug through old newspapers, looking for any mention of the house. What I found sent a chill down my spine. In 1923, a family of 4 had lived in the house. The parents and their 2 children disappeared without a trace. The only clue was a diary found in the attic, written by the youngest child, a girl named Emily. The entries were fragmented and disturbing, filled with references to the shadow man who lived in the attic. The last entry read, "He's here again. He says he's going to take us away. I don't want to go. I'm scared. The case was never solved. The house stood empty for years, until a new family moved in. They lasted less than a month before they fled in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind. The pattern repeated itself over the decades. Families would move in, only to leave abruptly, never to return. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to face the shadow. I couldn't live in fear, and I couldn't abandon the house. It was my home now, and I wasn't going to let something drive me out. That night, I returned to the attic. The shadow was waiting for me. It had grown, filling the entire corner of the room. As I approached, it began to take shape, a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide. It didn't speak, but I could feel its presence in my mind, a cold, malevolent force pressing against my thoughts. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it lunged at me, its form dissolving into a cloud of darkness that enveloped me completely. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the suffocating blackness. Then, I remembered the diary. Emily had written about the shadow man, but she had also mentioned a name she had heard him whisper in the night. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. Malachar. I shouted, the name tearing from my throat. The darkness recoiled, pulling away from me as if burned. The shadow retreated to the corner, its form flickering and unstable. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. I never went back to the attic. I sealed the door shut and hired a contractor to reinforce it. The scratching stopped, and the house fell silent. But I know the shadow is still there, waiting. I can feel it, even now, lurking in the corners of my mind. I've thought about leaving, about selling the house and never looking back. But something keeps me here. Maybe it's the hope that I can finally put an end to the shadow's reign of terror. Or maybe it's the fear that it will follow me if I leave. Either way, I can't escape the truth, the shadow in the attic is real. And it's not going anywhere. I still hear it sometimes, a faint whisper in the dead of night, calling my name. I don't know how much longer I can stay here, but I do know this, the shadow is patient. It's waited this long. It can wait a little longer. And when it finally comes for me, I'll be ready.